Welcome to the Association's Futures Podcast, brought to you by Association Activision. We ask you to join us to discuss the future of the Association's community. How can we build and focus on the many futures we will see during these disruptive times? Let's get started with today's guest.
Well, good day, everybody. It's time for another Association Futures podcast. Today, we are joined by Sam Bryson, a professional EOS implementer with over 2 decades of experience helping leadership teams drive measurable results. Sam has a deep passion for helping organizations clarify their vision, improve execution, and build trust-based cultures that foster genuine accountability. He's led a remarkable turnaround in his leadership career, taking a struggling firm to one of the top performers in its industry in just 16 months, and now helps organizations across a wide range of sectors, including helping nonprofits simplify complexity and accelerate growth. Whether you're leading a small staff association or managing a national nonprofit, Sam brings insights that can help transform how your team works together and achieves its goals. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Michael, thanks for having me, and thank you for reading that intro just the way I wrote it. I really appreciate it.
I thought it was pretty good, right? Yeah, I said the man writes well. What can I say? Sam, I think it's important that we start by telling our audience exactly what is EOS and how does it differ from other strategic or operational frameworks that association leaders might be familiar with.
Sure. So I like to say that EOS is a set of simple tools that help you make sure that all the human energy in your organization is moving in exactly the same direction. Ultimately, that's when you can achieve your goals and oftentimes achieve even more than you thought was possible. These little misalignments and little disconnects between people and organizations are ultimately what causes a lot of the friction and holds people back from achieving their goals. And you mentioned other potential frameworks and ways people use to do strategic planning and execution. And I just want to stress that there are many out there, and that ultimately the one that works for the team is the best for them. I just can say that for me, I have yet to find a simpler, more straightforward, easy to implement set of tools for distilling what can be a complicated topic for some people into something that's very straightforward to execute.
Well, thanks for that explanation. And well, how do you tailor EOS for nonprofits and associations, whereas missions, not markets, drive their work?
It's a great question, and one that I get often from this audience. And I would say that while there's maybe a little bit of tailoring, ultimately, I think all nonprofits and all organizations ultimately want to have impact. They want to see the efforts and the work and the time and the energy that they're putting in really pay off in terms of that constituent group they're serving, whether they're customers or members or however you refer to them. And so ultimately, the tools help you get there. And so they can apply equally to a for-profit driven organization, but also an organization that's a little more mission driven, as long as that organization is really passionate about the impact that they want to have.
Before we go on any further, I think it might be good to tell people what the E, O, and S actually stand for.
Great call. So EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, so named because it is the way of running an organization and it's best fit for those that are entrepreneurial in nature.
Well, some associations work with volunteer boards, rather than a full executive team. And how does EOS adapt to that kind of leadership structure?
It's a great question. So the EOS work is primarily done by the leadership team of the organization. So the whether it's an executive director and their team, but what EOS provides for boards who are usually interested in what's the strategic plan? Are we tracking? What are our major issues? EOS provides a way for the team, the leadership team, to share that information in an easily digestible way so that the board can clearly see what the organization is up to and also work on that accountability that boards sometimes provide for those leadership teams.
In our previous conversations, you've mentioned a number of times this idea of clarity of vision. And so, why do organizations, and in this case, especially nonprofits, often struggle with this? And how can EOS help fix that issue?
Well, it's a great question. First, I think people struggle with the definition of vision. So, what is it? And then once that's clear, you can then begin to define it and share it. But what I see people struggle with is everybody has, it's not that there is no vision in the organization. It's just that every person has a slightly different version of what that vision is. And so when I talk about getting clarity of vision, it's working with the leadership team of that organization to get all the thoughts about where they think they're going out on the table and make sure that everybody's aware of what everybody's thinking. Oftentimes, there's some surprises, even among people who've worked together for a long time about, well, I thought we were going here. No, I thought that meant this. And so it's that process of working together to answer a simple set of 8 questions that get everybody clear on where you're going and how you're going to get there.
So, in your experience, what's the cost of misalignment between an association strategic plan and that day-to-day operations?
hmm Well, when I think about costs, the one thing I think about for any organization, what's the one thing you can't make more of? And the answer is time, right? And so the time that you take and invest in trying to have many, many conversations and clarifying what it is you're trying to do and make sure it lands with people, that's time you can't get back. And ultimately, for organizations that are struggling and want to have that impact that I talked about, every day that goes by that they don't have that impact is a missed opportunity. So that's how I think about the cost of that misalignment. It's burning up that precious commodity you can't make more of, which is time.
As we had our earlier conversations, you indicated to me that EOS emphasizes this idea of discipline and accountability. So, in your work, how do you introduce those values in mission-driven environments that may be more consensus oriented?
Mm. So it's a good question. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. So sometimes that consensus orientation, while it's got great intentions, it does limit the impact that you can have as an organization. And so I'm always probing a little bit. Are we happy with where we are? Is this consensus getting us to our goals and having the impact that we want to have? If not, how do you feel about the idea of being pushed a little bit or being tested a little bit on whether you're doing what you said you were going to do? And I think, competitive, motivated people who want to have impact, they tend to respond well to that kind of questioning and prompting. Those are the folks that I really enjoy working with.
Sam, are there some simple EOS tools that association leaders can start using right away in improving their execution and decision making?
There are a couple that I would definitely highlight. So the first is a weekly scorecard. And just to explain what that is, there are certain activities that you do each day in your organization that lead to the outcomes that you want to have. And what that scorecard is designed to do is to have you think really hard about what those things are, distill them down to a handful of numbers that you look at on a weekly basis, and also adopting the discipline of reporting on and looking at those numbers on a weekly basis. So it could be outbound calls, it could be meetings, it could be name your activity, ultimately something that helps you drive the organization forward. And it sounds simple, But simple, not simplistic, is what I hope I'm landing here with this commentary, that even the act of looking at a set of 5 to 15 activity measurables on a weekly basis ultimately will help you figure out whether you're doing the activities you need to be doing and whether they're leading you to the outcomes you want. So that's one that I would say you can adopt, anyone can adopt tomorrow. And then the second is we call the mini OS this concept of rocks. So oftentimes what I see in strategic planning, people get together at an offsite, right? They spend time away from their organization. They're doing the right things. They're creating a plan for the long term. But then it sort of breaks down when they return to the business and try to move those priorities forward in a meaningful way. And then they get to the next offsite a year later. And that's the first time they're looking at the plan they created at the last offsite. And these rocks are just 90-day business priorities. So taking that year of work and those goals you decided you wanted to achieve and chunking them up into 90-day increments, which provide you with a little bit more of a digestible set of things you can do to help move those goals forward. So just that concept. Plan 90 days at a time, align on priorities 90 days at a time, work those priorities, then plan the next 90 days. Ultimately helps get you momentum. So those are two I'd highlight.
It sure makes a lot of sense to me. I just thought of something that we really didn't discuss when we were talking about doing this particular podcast. Are there any differences that you think exist between hybrid run organizations and or virtual organizations and in-office organizations that EOS in particular can assist with?
Well, that's a big question. I'll get to my thoughts. So absolutely, I think every organization, depending on the norms and the culture and the ways of communication, can run in an in-office, a hybrid, 100% virtual. I do find that those teams that are working virtually, unless they already know each other very well, one of the things that is sometimes a challenge for them is developing trust and developing connection. And one of the ways that through EOS we work to improve team health is in this transparent discussion about scorecard related items, activities, as well as business priorities. So getting clear on what those are and having the leadership team talk about them each week. Because ultimately, that trust develops when I know you, I like you, and I know I can count on you. And one of the ways that I begin to establish that feeling of trust and knowing I could count on you is when we're chatting every week and we're reviewing where we are in terms of priorities. And if we're not moving the ball forward, we're figuring out what to do to move the ball forward. And so I think the tools and the disciplines, just that getting together every week, planning 90 days at a time, create that environment for those trust-based relationships to flourish.
So let's talk a little bit about culture and the idea of a healthy team.
Mhm.
So I know you've talked about bringing culture to life. Seems
Mhm.
like such a simple thing to say. Uh, what does it mean practically in organizations?
So for me, one of the frustrations I had in my career, you mentioned the 20 years that I've spent working with entrepreneurial organizations, is that oftentimes what was stated as culture, usually that's shared in terms of a set of core values or a mission statement or something like that. What was said and stated and what were two different things. And so, what we do in order to help bring that culture to life, and what I love doing with teams, is helping them uncover what their real core values are. Not the things that they think sound good, but ultimately are the set of characteristics that really embody what they expect from the culture. And then giving them tools to make sure they're talking about that with their people and self assessing themselves and assessing their people as well about how consistently they exhibit those behaviors they say they expect. And when you force people to really be clear about what are core values to them, not things like integrity or honesty, which let's face it is table stakes for anybody that you or I would expect to hire into an organization, or anybody who's listening to this podcast, I think. But what really makes them unique and different, and what defines what people look like that they love to spend time with, that's how we bring that culture to life, is having more honest and open discussions about it, and also talking about it once every at least 90 days.
So let's go a little deeper here then. Uh, how do trust and accountability interact in healthy teams, and what blocks them from really taking root?
Hmm. Great question there. So I'm not sure if you're a fan of Patrick Lencioni or have read his books, but oftentimes when we're talking about team health, we are talking about those concepts. And so he ultimately, and we say that the foundation of all team health is a vulnerability-based trust. So that is where you and I feel comfortable saying anything because we know that you and I are committed to the greater good of the organization, and whatever we're saying is not to advance a personal agenda of mine or yours. Oftentimes, we're humans. Oftentimes, ego creeps into the conversation, right? But that vulnerability-based trust is what enables us to have productive conflict. In other words, to disagree, but to have productive disagreement. Ultimately, when we're working in a team setting, we're looking to get the best out of every single person and the best out of the collective team. And the only way to do that is if everybody feels comfortable saying what's on their mind and not pulling back or being worried about what somebody might perceive. And so those two things are the foundation of a lot of team health. From there, you can move on to agreeing on a course of action, to holding each other accountable, ultimately to getting the results that you want. But that vulnerability-based trust is very hard for us as adults. We tend to have built up our armor over the course of growing up and having our professional experiences and managing the expectations of others. And so oftentimes when we step into that team setting, we're not truly ourselves, but we are something a little bit adjacent to who we are. And uncovering that and putting those things together is hugely important.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of being with Lencioni a number of times. He's been very active in the Maxwell Leadership Group, and that's where I met him and had the pleasure of having lunch with him one day. He is quite the guy in terms of this whole issue of vulnerability and trust. So
Mhm.
excellent points there. Can you share a story, hopefully from a nonprofit or an association that actually uses EOS to drive the kind of meaningful change, and what the turning points were with that kind of an organization?
Yeah, sure thing. So, one of my clients is a nonprofit organization, and they began the journey with me about 9 months ago. And one of the most impactful things in our early conversations was we talked about that culture earlier, and we talked about the importance of in a team and in an organization being surrounded with people that fit those core values that you expect. And the way we defined their core values helped them see that there were a couple of people who were on the team who ultimately were not fits for those core values. Those are hard realizations, and I can imagine they're especially hard in this sector, but helping them to see that and ultimately make a decision that they needed to go in a different direction was hugely, hugely impactful. I saw them not too long afterwards, and they said that it had been the single biggest impactful change that they had made in their organization in the last couple of years. So those are the hard issues that sometimes we don't want to get close to, but that was the story that came to mind when you asked me that question.
So, in your experience, then, are there some like early warning signs that organizations might benefit from what you bring using the EOS processes?
What I typically listen for in conversations with folks is frustration. And that frustration can take a lot of different forms, but one of those frustrations can be stagnation. So For example, the organization or the association has grown steadily, and then they get to a point where they kind of tread water for a couple of years and they have bigger ambitions. They'd like to move beyond that. And they're not exactly sure how to do that. They've tried a couple things and it hasn't worked out. That's certainly one of them. The other one is if you just feel like you're having a lot of trouble getting people to understand where you want to go, and you feel like you're constantly repeating yourself with your people or with people outside the organization, not getting that message through and clearly. And then the last one I would say is sometimes there's a transition in organizations that one group has started the organization and they've grown it to a certain point, and they're realizing about themselves that they might want to change the way that they interact with the organization, focus on different things, and they're not sure exactly how to transfer the leadership and the management infrastructure of the organization to a new leadership team or a new set of leaders. And going through this process can help establish some of that foundation that helps that transition go smoothly.
Many associations, organizations in general, are navigating huge disruptions in our current environment. Some of it's been brought about by AI or huge demographic shifts, cultural issues, political polarization. Well, how does EOS help leaders remain that agility in the face of all this change?
So this is a huge passion area of mine. I think it's very easy today for us to get caught up in things that we cannot control. And as leaders and stewards of the organization, it is your job to be maniacally focused on what you can control and make sure that you're laser focused on what you need to change within that scope. And so, what EOS does certainly is drive home that message. There's stuff outside of our control. That's noise. What's the stuff that we can control? And then you talked about agility, right? And EOS gets you into this 90-day world where you're planning and prioritizing 90 days at a time. And what that does is that helps make sure that you stay agile. You're revisiting things every 90 days. Are we still going where we thought we were going to go? Do we need to make a pivot and change? And I find that installing that every 90-day checkpoint and reinforcing those ideas that this is a constantly evolving organization, very helpful in moving people towards that agile kind of mindset you talked about earlier.
The 90-day thing sounds so simple and commonsensical. I'm wondering why you see that it may not actually be what people do. What causes them not to put it into some kind of structure?
Well, you're familiar with the frog in the boiling pot of water. So many leaders are long tenured. Some of them are shorter tenured, whatever it is, right? But it's not uncommon for people to get comfortable where they are and feel like, you know what? We are all on the same page. I kind of feel like things are going okay. We don't necessarily need to take a day away from the business, make sure we're all still on the same page. And so that's the biggest thing is, and then you're a busy person. I'm sure you talk to many busy people. I get a lot of, well, we just don't have time for that, right? And how are you going to get that time back if you don't take a step away, take a big step back, look at that organization and think about it every 90 days? How are you going to get that time back and feel like you're in control and you're driving the organization where you want it to go, as opposed to the organization driving you? But yes, a lot of concepts. You talked about simplicity. A lot of our concepts are simple but not simplistic. And I heard a quote recently. It was a Leonardo da Vinci quote, I think, but it was something like sophistication is in the simplicity. And when something is simple, it's because it's been hammered and honed and mastered over time. And it's just a matter of, do we have the discipline to follow that simplicity?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned this idea of simplicity. I also think there's this thing, the difference between simple and easy. Uh,
Oh,
a lot of people think of email as relatively easy to use, and it is, you type away and the next thing you know, you send it off and then you realize maybe you should have said exactly what you did. But behind it is a lot of hugely complex technology.
hmm
And that's one of the things we see all the time. So that's an excellent point. So if you had one piece of advice you'd like to put forward for a nonprofit executive director thinking about implementing EOS, um, what would it be?
I think my one piece of advice would be to just get started. So these tools, the best part is that these tools are all available out there, and I'm passionate about sharing them with anybody. If they decide they would like sort of some help, obviously I can help there, but ultimately my passion is making sure that as many people are aware of the tools as possible and that they're thinking about using them. And a lot of times we let perfection be the enemy of good enough. And with almost every one of the clients I work with, right away, early in the process, they're starting to use these tools, and they always tell me, man, this seemed so simple when you explained it to us, but wow, this is really effective. And it's helping us move forward. And so I certainly had to take that lesson to heart in my career. If you're thinking about doing something, don't worry about getting it perfect first. You'll never get started, right? But if you start today and you just do a little bit, focus on getting 1% better every day, then a year later, you're 365% better than where you were before. And it's that getting started that sometimes people get hung up on.
I mentioned the Maxwell group earlier. You know, one of his phrases all the time is learn a little, do a little. And it's a good, it's like you just said, that's so simple to say, but it's not really all that easy to make happen.
Yeah, I love it. It
Yeah.
fascinates me.
So, Sam, we're getting ready to wrap up, and what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to tell people how they can reach you. And of course, when this is recorded, they'll have an opportunity to see it online. But what's the best way for someone to reach out to you?
Thanks for letting me share that a little bit here. So send me an email, sam.bryson@eosworldwide.com, and just let me know what's on your mind. I'd love to chat.
How about repeating that email address one more time?
Sure thing. For the folks listening at home, it's sam.bryson@eosworldwide.com.
Well, Sam, thank you for sharing your insights and experience with us today. Your work with EOS uh, offers powerful lessons for association leaders seeking to strengthen their teams, clarify their vision, and foster meaningful accountability within their organization. And for our listeners, whether you're leading a small staff association, working with a complex volunteer board, or just trying to make strategic progress without burning out, Sam's perspective reminds us that simplicity, clarity, alignment are possible even in the most mission driven environments. If you'd like to learn more about Sam's work or explore how EOS might support your leadership team, be sure to check out the episode notes for links to his website and other resources. And as always, stay tuned for more conversations on association futures. Sam, thanks for being with us. Any final words?
Just want to say a big thank you to you, Michael. It's been wonderful to be your guest. I love the work you do, and I appreciate you having me on.
Happy to be with you. Folks, we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Have a great day.